Good afternoon. And today what we're going to do is just kind of go over motion again. We went over it a couple times in class, and this is just a refresher, so it's going to be pretty quick. I wanted to create an underwater scene, so here are some of the fishes that I created that I will be providing you for this tutorial. You can kind of see I made some coral that's an animated GIF that was looping. You see this little orca here. I have a puffer fish that's moving. In fact, the only fish that is not moving is this fish that you see here. And you see they're all very small and they're all animated GIFs. We're going to be using those for this project. So let's get started. Go ahead and open up Motion. Now, if you haven't, I'm just going to start from scratch here. Start by selecting Motion, File New, and you should have this window. Make sure you're at 24 frames per second, HD 1080p, and 60 seconds is what we would like to use for our timing here, and we just hit Open. By default, we go to Projects, Inspector, and we just change the background to something gray so that we can see our pixel outlines better. The background's still transparent. There's nothing behind us, but it makes things easier to see. We're going to go ahead and import that folder full of fish. You can download these, and I'm just going to shift select all of them to import everything. And you'll see that they just get imported here, and I'll just move these around so you can see all 5 fish are in fact imported and put into a group folder like this. You'll notice that I'm going to show you this timeline, but you notice that the only thing you see when you move is the one that's called School of Fish. That's because the other fish, and you can barely see it here, but if I were to zoom in on the front here, and then scroll over, you see that these fish only exist for 2 frames. In fact, the coral might exist for 3 frames or 4 frames, but they don't exist very long, and that's because they're animations that we're going to have to loop them. So here's what we're going to do. I'd like you to go to put your playhead at the beginning and select the pufferfish, go to the properties, and what I want you to do is go way down here where it says timing, and I want you to show the timing area, just like we talked about in class. And you'll notice that currently at the end of the playback, which is 2 frames, nothing happens. We have none. But I would like you to set it to loop. And then now I want you to actually loop it several times. And you'll notice when you do that, this pufferfish now exists for a longer period of time. You can kind of see that right there. I want you to change the speed of how fast it's looping to 10% as a good starting point. And that's going to, again, allow that fish to move a little bit slower. And you'll notice that as I zoom the timeline out to the full 60 seconds, you can see that we kind of run out of pufferfish way out here. So even though we came to our end of our slider here, it's like not enough. So you're actually able to click and hold on this number and exaggerate the amount of time that it happens until the pufferfish is on the entire time for the screen. I want you to do that with the fish animation too. Select it, change the speed to 10%, and change the end condition to loop, and then make it 100, but then click on that 100 and make it like a little bit more than 1400 or whatever until it fills up the screen, and then go through that with all the other fish as well. End condition loop, speed 10%, and just go until it fills up the screen. Orca the same way, 10%, and end condition loop. And then loop it a lot, and then loop it more until, again, it fills up the entire timeline so that it exists the entire time as well, right? And then finally, I call it leaves. I don't know why. It's kind of like coral or whatever, but it's, yeah, you get it. 10%, loop it. Oops, wrong one. There it is. Loop it more than 100, right? Let's try stat. Okay. Now you'll notice that everything exists on the screen, but not everything is actually moving. Do you notice how a few of the fish are moving? the coral's moving, but everything that had only 2 frames, which is the pufferfish and these other fish, they're not moving. And I don't know, there's some type of glitch in motion, but what we need to do in order for them to move is go File, Save the document, and we're going to call this Underwater. And we're going to save it on our desktop and hit Save. And now I'm going to quit what I just made, and then I'm going to reopen it by going to my desktop and double-clicking the underwater scene again. Don't know why this happens, but when you do that, you'll notice that now all the animals are actually moving, with the exception of the one that was never moving, the bluefish here. But everything else has blinking and gills moving. Now, if you want to speed up the movement, again, you can select any of the fish. Like, for instance, I think the orca could be, let's see, what could be faster? Maybe this coral thing. So select the leaves, which is the coral thing. Go to the inspector properties and then change the speed maybe to 20%. And then you'll obviously have to increase the amount of looping. If it ever gets stuck where you can't do this, you can just put the back to 100 and then you should be able to go much higher. And now you can see it's moving a little bit faster. Okay, so let's start with the leaves. We're going to take our leaves and we're going to move them out of the group. And when you do that, you'll notice this blue line. It makes a new group, and we'll just call this base, for the base of our, like, this is where things are going to be in the water. And I'm going to close both these groups out. This group is just fish, and this group is like the base of our ocean, right? And we're just going to move this object down here. And you'll see that now it's down here. I'm going to open up the base, and I'm going to take this, and I'm just going to duplicate this by option dragging. You can kind of see. And then I have just made a bunch of different things. Now, I'm option dragging a lot of them just to show you that this is possible and to see if I can get this to crash. And you'll notice that they all kind of move at the same time. And that's fine. But if you want them to move at different times, all you have to do in this area down here where you've made all these copies is slide them slightly one way or another to the left, just a little bit or a little bit more than a little bit. And what that does is it offsets some of these so that they're not all in the same, they're all not all doing the same thing at the same time. And you can kind of see that gives you that look. Right? And remember, you don't want to slide it this way because now we have a gap where one of these is going to appear like suddenly at the beginning of our timeline. So slide them to the left and make sure you have plenty of them so they last the entire time. So here's what we've got so far. And all we did was take one of these animated GIFs and duplicate them by option dragging. Okay, next thing we're going to do is let's take this little fish, and notice how this little fish is behind all these objects, right? And that is because our base here is in front or on top of our fish. If we were to change the order by putting the base down here, notice now the fish is on top of all these objects, right? So just something to know that the order of like top to bottom is going to affect how things work, right? So we want this fish. Let's actually use this little orange fish. We're going to have this fish swim through this coral right here, and it's going to be behind. So obviously, if we want the fish to be behind, we've got to put it behind the base. And one way to do that is just take the fish out and put it underneath until you see this line. Let's try this again. This is really important. You don't want to rush this. You want to move it to the left as far as possible. It's not doing it. It's kind of wanting to put it in this group, and we don't want to put it in this group. I'm going to lock this group so that nothing can happen. And now I'm going to take this fish and put it under that base group, and you'll notice now it's behind. So we're going to select our fish, and we're going to do what we did in class before. We're going to add a basic motion, and we're going to do a throw. And we're just going to throw it to the left. Now, I'm not going to use the HUD to throw this, although that is totally possible, right? I want to do this without the HUD, so I'm going to turn the HUD off, and I'm going to show you how this works using the behavior. So over here are our behaviors, and this gives you a lot more control because I don't want the Y up and down to change, so I want to keep that at 0. But I do want the speed to be negative, and negative is, you know, in the left, going left direction. And so we're just going to make it negative 150. And this allows you to dial in the perfect speed. And you can kind of see how that fish is working, right? One thing to note is that the fish starts on screen. So you can always take that fish. This is why it's nice to lock these things. You can take that fish by selecting it, and you can move it off screen, and then it won't come on screen until a little while into this animation. All right, so that's throw. Let's try a different thing. We are going to select, we're going to have one of the fish swimming like this, but we're going to have it swimming up and down like this. Okay, so in order to do that, let's pick this fish, and it's called fish animation. I don't know why I named it that. We're going to go ahead and add a throw. In fact, the same exact throw, we could use this throw right here. We can use this on any fish just by holding the Option key down and dragging it. And by doing that, it makes an identical copy of that motion. So now both fish are swimming at the exact same amount. But that's one way of like putting the same throw on different things. You can just hold the Option key and that copies it onto different things. Now we're going to move this fish over here, and I'm going to change the throw amount and change the velocity to negative 300, which is faster, even though it doesn't seem like it. And notice what I did here. I changed all three numbers to negative 300, so I want to undo that. I only want to change this number to negative 300, the negative 300x. And you'll notice that that makes things go faster. You'll see how fast that goes. You see? So we put them back here at the beginning. Now, the up and down part of the motion, you can see when I open the position here, there is change that's happening on the X, right? It's getting more and more negative, and that's because I added that throw. But the Y position at 79 is not changing. In fact, if I move the Y position, you can see I can move this fish anywhere I want. But it's a constant. It doesn't have any animation, right? So we're going to take this Y position, put it at 50, and we're going to make that oscillate. And the way you do that is you select the Y position in this little drop down here. You go ahead and add a parameter, and it's this parameter we added in class before is called oscillate. What that does is it allows that fish to swim on that path, right? It's up and down plus a throw, which makes it oscillate. I'm going to move back to my beginning of my timeline here, and I'm going to select under behaviors for this fish. It gives me the ability to change the amplitude. I'm going to change that to about 50. And it changes the speed. I'm going to increase the speed. And you can see when I do that, it makes the fish, bob up and down. So changing the amplitude makes it a little less bobby, but it does give it a more of a feeling like this fish is moving in that type of motion. Since I really like that oscillation amount, guess what I can do? I can Option drag it by holding the Option key down and dragging it onto this orange fish. And now that also has that up and down movement, but it's not going as fast. All right, so two things we've done so far. Let's continue on. Some of the things that we've done that you haven't noticed, but each of these fish have this motion, and this motion happens throughout the throughout the animation. You can actually limit the amount of movement that this fish has. So for instance, if you want this fish to stop right here and just bob up and down, you can dial that in by selecting this throw and modifying it so that it does not, it's fairly long here. You can see you can pull this in and move it around so that you can say, hey, here we go. As soon as this throw runs out, you'll watch it. Like as soon as there's no more throw down here, the fish will stop, right? Because there's nothing throwing it any longer. And now it's just just the oscillation is actually moving. It's just bobbing, right? If you wanted the fish to continue, you can take this throw and you can Option drag it, which duplicates it. So let me do that. I'm going to collapse this base so that it doesn't take up so much space here. There you go. So see this throw right here? You can take this and you can duplicate it. And now you have the ability to keep throwing it like over here. So for instance, the fish starts, ends, it stops right here, no more throw. And then the throw continues here. You can kind of see it's holding, waiting, waiting, waiting. And then the throw continues. And this works for everything that has a throw or whatever you want. I mean, oscillate, you could do the same thing, just so you know. Okay, let's add some more. Let's see, what else can we add? We have our puffer fish, right? And we want to throw it in the same direction, but notice that the direction of the puffer fish is just wrong. So how do you flip puffer fish around? Obviously, we could grab this handle and turn it upside down. I'm holding the shift key, but then it's like upside down. That's not what we want, right? The way you flip something around, like we did in class, if you remember, is we went to the rotate, open that up, and we changed the Y to rotate a full 180 degrees, right? So we can just type negative 180 or 180, one of the two, and what you'll get is the puffer fish is now thrown, now going in a different direction. Let's go ahead and see how that's working. Looks good, right? So let's move the puffer fish back here. Let's copy one of these oscillations to the puffer fish. Boom. And then holding the Option key, let's copy this throw as well. So now we have a puffer fish and it is also moving. Let's slow it down a little bit by going to the behaviors and changing our throw velocity, making it a little less negative, right? It's just moving along nice and slow. So now we've got 3 fish moving in the right direction. Okay, our orca is really far away, which is why it's small. Otherwise, it's like a baby orca and these fish will eat it, right? So how do we show distance in a space like this? Well, here's what we're going to do for today. We're going to use this rectangle tool, and I'm going to click on it. And you'll notice I've got to be in a group. So right here, I've got one fish group, one base group, and this group. I'm going to make a new group by right-clicking and selecting New Group, right? Selecting that. And now I'm going to select my rectangle tool, and I'm going to draw a rectangle that's fairly big, like this. And notice it's white, and it's called rectangle. I'm going to call this background. I'm going to go to the Shapes tab under the Properties area, the Inspector area Shapes. And you can see I can fill this with a color, and I'm going to fill it with like a nice ocean blue, maybe something like this, right? Notice it has no outline either. Now, this doesn't fill up the screen, so let's go ahead and just change our size here to something smaller, and then make this shape, which is just a rectangle, really big. Now, go back to Fit. Now, what are we going to do so that we can actually see all this stuff? Well, you know it. We're going to take this group, and we're going to move it all the way to the bottom and let go. And now the group is below everything. Notice how the group didn't accidentally get put in another group. So now our background is available, and you can kind of see it. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this background just by right-clicking on it and selecting Duplicate. And we're going to call this Darken. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this darken. Notice that there are now 2 backgrounds, one on top of another, right? And we're going to take this background, darken, and we're going to change the color to black. You're like, well, we can't see anything now, right? Because it's darker, and it is now black. We are going to go to our Properties tab, and I want you to notice this opacity slider here that says 100%. We are on this rectangle, and we're going to change the opacity to 50%. That means 50% transparent. Now we can actually see like the background, but we can see it as a darker background, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to take from our fish, we're going to take our orca, and we're going to move it in between the background and the darken area. So now it is really much farther back, right? And the other fish are closer because they're not being occluded by this dark background. Now this dark background doesn't need to be dark. It could be just the opposite color, like it could be white, right? And you'll notice that that looks like all of a sudden it's in a foggy area and the orca is like in the fog. So you could use this technique to kind of like break things up into layers that are further and closer. So everything in the background will look darker and everything in the foreground will look lighter because, you know, of this technique. And again, you're just kind of layering things. For me, I think I could even use a little bit darker so that it really pushes that orca back in there, right? And you can kind of now see that orca back there. And notice what I did here. Notice that when I created the shape, I created it right here in the timeline. So everything, it works here fine. But notice that when I go back to the beginning, that shape doesn't exist. That group wasn't even existed. So I need to move that group with those shapes. I need to move those shapes back to the beginning and way to the end so that they exist throughout the timeline here. Okay, we want this orca, oops, let's just select the orca here. We want this orca to move like down like this, up, and then down, maybe on some type of path, right? And so what I'm going to have you do is actually create a trail that this orca is going to move on. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to select this B-spline area here. I'm going to make sure I'm in the group because that's going to make the B-spline in this group. So B-spline in the group, right? Select it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I'm going to start here with the orca and it's going to go down here. I'm just clicking. Then it's going to go here. It's going to try to surface and then it's going to go back down and then off the screen like this. So I'm going to hit the return key now because I'm happy with this path. And all of a sudden you got this weird thing with white. So we went to the shape before and you'll notice the fill is turned on. So let's turn off the fill mode here. And now we can see the B-spline. It has a white color. I don't know why that's white. It could be any color, right? We don't really need that either. We don't need the outline. We need both of these off so that it's transparent. And then if you click away from it, you'll see it goes away completely. All right. How do we get the orca to go on to this B-spline, right? And actually traverse it. I'm going to keep the outline on just so you can see this is the path, right? The way you do it is you select the orca, go to behaviors just like before, basic motion, but this time we're going to use motion path, right? Now you notice it's just a straight line, which is not what we want, right? What we want for this motion path for the orca, right, is under behaviors, it says what's the path shape? And right now it's just whatever. We want the geometry we made to be the shape. And it says, well, drag that geometry here. So let's take our B-spline and click on it and select it and click on it and let go. And you'll notice that that geometry now is right here. So let's take a look at how the orca moves. It actually moves on that geometry, right? And you can see it right here, orca. I'm going to try to tidy this up so you guys can see what's going on. So it's great, but the orca doesn't swim sideways like this, right? We want to snap the orca, align it to the path. And we want to turn off the path because we don't need to see it anymore, but you kind of see that the orca is going on this path. So, and I'm going to make this path shorter so that the orca gets through the path faster. And if I make the path shorter, well, you'll see that the orca swims quicker. So how do I get the orca to actually align itself to this path? I'm just going to go to behaviors, basic motion, and then notice the snap alignment to motion. I'm going to select that with the orca selected. And now you see that the orca actually is following along that path, as you can kind of see. And you notice that it gets through the path by the time the path stops here. The final thing that we're going to do is add a little bit of pizzazz to this whole thing. I'm going to select the most boring fish and put it over here. And what I'm going to do, put my playhead at the beginning here, is I'm going to select that fish and I'm going to go up here and I'm going to make particles. I'm going to click it once. Now this is really important. Here's what happens if you just let it play. Obviously craziness, right? let's talk a little bit about particles. I'm going to select my emitter, and I'm going to go to my emitter tab. And what I'm going to do is change the emission angle. Let's move the playhead about right here. I'm going to change my emission angle to something smaller, like 40 degrees. You see what's going to happen. It's 40 degrees here. I'm also going to change my emission angle so that the angle is like forward of the fish, right? So that's what we've done so far. So our emission range, we're just going to call it 40. And the angle, we're going to call it 180. Just follow along. Now the birth rate is how many fish we're seeing, and there are 30 fish per second being born. So let's dial this down to maybe, I don't know, 7 fish being born. And the birth rate randomness, we can just leave it as is. Now, how long do these fish live before they disappear? Well, they live exactly 5 seconds. That's what the life means. So let's take this life and give them a full 60 seconds of life, since we've got 60 seconds of video here that we can give them life for. And you'll notice now they're actually going to live the entire time, right? Still too many fish. So let's actually take that birth rate and dial it down to 2. There we go. Let's see. What else do we want to do? Speed. Let's change the speed to like 50. And that's how fast they're moving. Maybe let's make that 150 actually. So I like the fact that they're going faster. And then let's add some randomness, maybe like 100 to the speed, so that some of them are going faster, some of them are going slower. Let's add a little bit of angle randomness so that some of them are angled up, some of them are angled down, right? And some of these other things you can play with, right? Now, let's move this back to the beginning. We know that we had this on screen, so let's take it off screen and let's see what happens with this fish emitter off screen. And you can kind of see now it's like an entire school of fish have decided to invade our little tiny place with our puffer fish. Anyway, that's a little bit of some of the interesting things you could do with motion, right? I want you to practice some of the things that we did here. And then with the last fish that we really didn't do anything, or I think we did something with all the fish, try to add one more element into this that you've created that would work, and see what you can do as far as like adding, maybe some background information, something as a background element, or another fish or a squid. See if you could use some of the stuff we've learned in class for this next thing. Okay, that's it. Okay, so when you're ready to export, don't forget to save your work, and then go up to the upper right hand corner where there's this share button, and go ahead and select Export Movie Default. The settings you're going to need for this project, if you embedded audio, you'll want to select video, audio. H.264 is what we're going to be using. That's what we're going to be exporting. You should export the entire 1 minute piece. And then under the render settings, what I would like you to do is select the best quality, but uncheck all these so that they're not selected. So they might be selected for you. So again, best, but everything else is turned off for your pixel art export. Go ahead and select next, and then you're going to put this somewhere on your computer, underwater. I'm just going to call it 2. And for me, I'm putting it in this motion tutorial folder. You could put it wherever you'd like. Once it's exported, you'll see this little countdown thing here, and it tells you how long it's taking to export it. Once it's exported, you can actually view this wherever you've exported it, and then it'll kind of tell you when it's done. And what you will be turning in at that point will be this file, and you can test it to make sure it's working as expected. Here it is, and it's the full minute long underwater file.